Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the podcast. And today I'm going to give my review of AEW's Dynamite. Starting off the evening, we have Tony Khan. He is shown via satellite. He is in Jacksonville, Florida. Tony Khan says that he won't be able to attend Dynamite last night because he is not medically cleared to leave Jacksonville, Florida. But the entire time that he's saying this, you can see like the feed starting to cut out. The feed eventually cuts out, and then they show the Young Bucks. And the Young Bucks pretty much say that they're going to be running the show from here on out until Tony Khan gets better. Now, if you guys do not know, which I'm sure you guys do know, that the Elite, the Young Bucks, Okada, and Jack Perry ended up attacking Tony Khan last week. It was a big ordeal, and Tony Khan looks like he's going to be off the scene with AEW for a little bit, or working via satellite in Jacksonville, Florida, after the injury that he sustained from the Elite. So, again, it's a really good storyline, and, I'm glad that the Young Bucks are actually continuing this story from what happened last week, and hopefully we get more insight of what's going to come next with this storyline in the next few weeks. After that, we have a Swerve segment. Swerve comes down to the ring, grabs a microphone, and says he is a fighting champion. He also mocks the Elite for what they had did to Tony Khan last week. Swerve then calls out his next competitor, but he also says that it is Swerve's house, and make sure you wipe your feet before you enter his house, which I thought was absolutely awesome. Then the Young Bucks are shown on the Titantron. Young Bucks then announce Swerve's next opponent, and his next opponent is none other than Christian Cage. Christian Cage returns to All Elite Wrestling. Christian then mocks Swerve. He ends up attacking Swerve. He hits a kill switch on Swerve on the AEW World title, and then Nick Wayne ends up attacking Prince Nana. Couple things I want to say about this, man. Number one, was I shocked that it was Christian Cage? Yeah, to be honest with you, I was, because he lost his TNT Championship against Copeland. I didn't think, well, he lost the belt, then won it back, and the storyline between Copeland and Christian was far from over, in my opinion. But Christian lost clean, and I didn't think Christian, if we're looking at the rankings mean absolutely jack shit for this matchup. Because Christian's been off TV for a little while now. So the rankings need to go. And I said this last week, and I'm going to say the same thing again. The ranking system's flawed. There's no reason to have it. It's not needed. But with that being said, and what Christian was talking about during this, attack on Swerve and the promo that he cut on Swerve last night, it does actually make a lot of sense of why Christian did call out Swerve. There's a lot of unfinished business between Christian and Swerve. The last time that we've seen Christian work with Swerve is, I believe they teamed up in a match for, I think it was All In. I could be wrong on that, but I believe they were in a tag team match at All In, AEW's biggest pay-per-view. And Christian, kind of touched bases on that last night and how they lost the match and so on and so forth. He also mentions the fact that when Swerve was a heel, he ended up going over to Nick Wayne's gym to attack Nick Wayne at his home. So, especially with the allegiance that Nick Wayne has with Christian wants a little revenge on Swerve for what he did to Nick Wayne at Nick Wayne's gym, or at his home, I should say. So, the story kind of writes itself. We're going to see how it plays out. In my honest opinion, am I against it? No. I think, to be honest, I think Christian being a heel, number one, is the best Christian that you're ever going to get. Hands down. And I think Christian, the body of work that Christian has put in since he's been in AEW, has been the best since his entire career, in my opinion. So I'm all for this. And honestly, for what it's worth, it's only going to benefit Swerve. Swerve's not dropping that belt yet. And I think Swerve is going to have a really decent title run. And I think he will successfully defend that belt against Christian Cage at Double or Nothing in May. So I'm absolutely all for the match. I think it tells a great story between Christian and Swerve. And the banter back and forth between Cage and Swerve is going to be absolutely incredible leading up to Double or Nothing. So I'm all for it. Moving on from that, we go into our first official match of the night. It is Adam Copeland defending the TNT title against Buddy Matthews. I thought this was a good match, man. It was a back-and-forth matchup between Copeland and Matthews, with Copeland keeping the pace of the match. Matthews then gets involved in the match by hitting a DDT off the ropes on Copeland. Matthews and Copeland then both exchange in the middle of the ring, with Matthews hitting a Liger bomb on Copeland. Copeland then hits a spear, pins for the 3, and your winner of the match and still TNT champion is Adam Copeland. After the match, Copeland then attacks Matthews. The lights go out, and the lights come back on. It's Malachi Black, and Copeland's holding a chair. Looks like he was going to go for a concerto, and Malachi Black and Buddy Matthews were telling Copeland to do it. Malachi Black was screaming to Copeland to tell him to hit Buddy Matthews with this chair shot. Now, it is kind of ironic because if you guys see people that wrestle the House of Black, especially when the mist is sprayed and Malachi Black sprays the mist or Julia Hart sprays the mist into their opponent's faces, it kind of changes them a little bit. It kind of makes them more, I wouldn't say heelish, but it has this darker side of that individual. When Sky Blue got sprayed by the mist by Julia Hart, you saw a darker side of, or a more evil side of Sky Blue, which I was absolutely all for. And I think after Malachi Black had sprayed the mist into Copeland's face, and what Copeland was going to do last night against Buddy Matthews with the concerto, I thought, to me, in my mind, it kind of, this mist that Malachi Black or Julia Hart sprays into their opponent's faces, it kind of turns them a little bit evil. And I don't know if Copeland's going to go heel, and we're going to see a heel Copeland after what happened with him and Malachi Black. Who knows? Somebody actually told me the other day that they would not be surprised if it did happen, if Copeland were to entertain joining the House of Black. Now, to me, that might be a stretch. Would I be against it? No. But I think him joining House of Black right now might be a stretch. And I was kind of hoping, for what it's worth, that there was going to be a match between Copeland and Malachi Black last night, but unfortunately that didn't happen. But it could very much happen at Double or Nothing later on this month in May. So if that happens, I'm all for it. But again, just pay attention to that miss, man, because I think it's doing something to the opponents that the House of Black face, and we could possibly see Adam Copeland turning heel possibly soon. I'm just saying, I'm not saying for sure, but it definitely could. I would not be surprised if it did happen. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is Samoa Joe versus Isaiah Cassidy. I thought it was a decent match. It was a back-and-forth matchup between Joe and Cassidy, with Joe keeping the pace of the match. Joe ultimately finishes the matchup by hitting a muscle buster on Isaiah Cassidy, pins him for the 3, and your winner of the match is Samoa Joe. Hats off to Samoa Joe for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we have an Orange Cassidy segment. Orange comes down to the ring. Orange Cassidy thought that after the street fight between the best friends, being Trent and Chuck, that everybody would reunite and the best friends would reunite once again. But Orange Cassidy says he was told by other people in the back that Chuck might not be able to ever wrestle again due to the injuries that he sustained in the street fight with Trent Beretta. Trent comes down to the ring. He's on the ramp. Trent says that Orange Cassidy is selfish, and he tries to make it all about himself. Don Callis ends up showing up. He whispers something in Orange Cassidy's ear, and then they both walk to the back. So it looks like Don Callis might possibly be recruiting Orange Cassidy, which would be absolutely insane if Orange Cassidy ends up deciding to join the Don Callis family. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It's for the FTW title. It is Chris Jericho versus Shibata. I thought this was a good match. Probably one of the best matches of the night. It was a back-and-forth matchup between Shibata and Jericho, with Jericho and Shibata both exchanging devastating chops in the middle of the ring. Jericho then hits Shibata with a trash can lid. Jericho then applies a Walls of Jericho, but the hold is broken. Shibata then applies a figure 4 leg lock, but Jericho breaks the hold by throwing a hockey puck into Shibata's face. Jericho and Shibata then both exchange kendo strikes on each other. Jericho then hits a code breaker. Jericho then goes for a Judas effect, but Shibata counters it. Big Bill gets involved in the match by attacking Shibata. He ends up hitting a choke slam on Shibata through the table, which allows Jericho to go for the pinfall. 1, 2, 3. And your winner of the match and still FTW champion is Chris Jericho. Hats off to Chris Jericho for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is Brian Cage versus Claudio Castagnoli. I thought it was a decent match. It was a back-and-forth matchup between Cage and Claudio, with Claudio keeping the pace of the match. Claudio then hits a giant swing on Cage in the middle of the ring, and then Claudio quickly applies a sharpshooter on Brian Cage, and your winner of the match, due to submission, is Claudio Castagnoli. Hats off to Claudio Castagnoli for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is Mariah May versus Serena Deeb. It is the main event of Dynamite. It was a good match. It was a decent match. It was a back-and-forth matchup between May and Serena Deeb, with Deeb keeping the pace of the match. Mariah May then hits a hip attack on Deeb in the corner, but Deeb gets up, applies a half crab on Mariah May. Toni Storm sees this. She ends up throwing in the towel, which stops the match, and your winner of the match is Serena Deeb. Hats off to Serena Deeb for getting the win in that matchup. Moving on from that, to close out the night, we have Kenny Omega. He returns finally to Dynamite from a serious injury with diverticulitis. Omega gets down to the ring and grabs a microphone. He talks about his injury and how it was life-threatening injury. Omega talks about Dynasty and how the matches that he saw in Dynasty really kind of made him reevaluate his career in wrestling, especially the match between Bryan Danielson and Will Ospreay. Omega says that he wants to change the world. Omega then calls out the Young Bucks. Okada is here. Okada gets face-to-face with Omega. Crowd starts going crazy. Omega says that he wants a rematch with Okada in a few months once he starts healing up. After that, Jack Perry quickly attacks Omega from behind. Young Bucks then come down to the ring. They hit an EVP trigger on Omega. FTR come down to the ring to attack the Elite and stop the attack from the Elite on Kenny Omega. Couple things I want to talk about, man, especially with AEW and what's been going on with AEW, my opinions on it. Number one, this storyline between, it's a hot topic. The storyline here between the Elite and Tony Khan, and my thoughts on it. Honestly, man, I think it's probably the best thing going right now in AEW. Hands down. I think it's one of those storylines that AEW desperately needed. I know there were some people that said that, it was, corny and it was not needed and it was lazy. But I think at the end of the day, man, I think AEW needed something like this. And I'm going to go on a limb here and say that I think the EVP Young Bucks are probably the best Young Bucks that we've seen this entire time. The character fits, how they portray themselves with this character. I mean, it's absolutely awesome. And it really pisses people off to see the Young Bucks because of how they are now. But I think it's some of the best quality of work that they've done since they've been with AEW and since AEW's been in existence, in my opinion. But that being said, I know there was a lot of rumors and speculation that Tony Khan was going to bring in an on-air GM, being the fact that Tony Khan might not be able to show up on Dynamite and have to work via satellite from Jacksonville, Florida, because he's not medically cleared yet to leave Jacksonville, Florida to be on the road for these shows for Dynamite. And to me, the first name that popped up in my head that would be a great on-air GM for AEW would be none other than Scott D'Amore. Now, if you guys don't know who Scott D'Amore is, Scott D'Amore used to be pretty much the main booker, if you will, and running the show over there for TNA until he was, kicked out of TNA for, undisclosed reasons. And he's still, no one knows what Scott D'Amore is doing at this point. To me, if, the situation is true and Tony Khan is looking for an on-air GM, I'd be pointing the finger at Scott D'Amore. If there's nothing going on with Scott D'Amore behind closed doors and behind the scenes and everything's good, I would bring in a guy like Scott D'Amore, 100%. A guy that could be, an on-air personality, an on-air GM that works exclusively with Tony Khan, that can kind of bring in the reins a little bit via Tony Khan to Scott D'Amore and make things run smoothly in AEW. That would definitely be something that, I would not be mad at all if Scott D'Amore ended up joining AEW. The other thing I want to talk about is Kenny Omega. Kenny Omega coming back last night, he was sorely missed, man. I think seeing Omega come back, and you can tell how badly the fans miss Kenny Omega, myself included. He was sorely missed. I'm glad that he's back. But I will say this too, man. With the injury that Omega has, it seems like it was legitimate. And I'm not trying to take anything away from Omega. But how he was talking about it and how the fact that, at one point, this diverticulitis that he has could go south. He could have had surgery, but that surgery might have caused him to have a colostomy bag for the rest of his life. I mean, the injury that Omega sustained with the diverticulitis seemed to be very serious. And like he said, life-threatening. And honestly, for what it's worth, I feel like, I don't know much about diverticulitis, but what I will say is this, from what I've heard, it's definitely career-ending, depending on how bad it gets. And, the way Omega was explaining it last night, it's, a ticking time bomb for Omega at this point. But, Omega wants to continue wrestling and wants to be a part of AEW and wants to continue his in-ring career, which I'm absolutely all for. And to be honest with you, AEW needs Omega back. And I'm not trying to take anything from Swerve or Ospreay or Danielson, but the main event scene right now is kind of thin, I would say right now, with Adam Cole being injured, and hopefully he comes back soon, but MJF being out, and he just recently got surgery. Bryan Danielson got injured in a match with Ospreay. There are some injuries right now that are kind of, taken away from the main event scene right now in AEW. So having Omega come back, it's a great addition. Speaking of additions, there's been some rumored talent that is possibly signed with AEW that we've yet to see. I mentioned this a couple weeks ago about Chris Sabin and Alex Shelley, the Motor City Machine Guns, being free agents and then having contract talks and finalizing those talks with AEW. Now, I don't know if that's a done deal yet. I don't know if they've already signed their contract with AEW and then Tony Khan's just waiting to bring them into the fold with AEW. Who knows? But I also found out the other day that AEW and Tony Khan had signed a top free agent in Camille. Now, if you guys don't know who Camille is, she is was the former NWA Women's Champion. She is a powerhouse. She's a force to be reckoned with within the women's division, no matter where she goes. And for AEW and Tony Khan to sign Camille, it is a big deal, not only for AEW, but that women's locker room right now, because, these additions to the roster, and again, if people start getting healthy, like Jamie Hayter and Britt Baker, and now having the addition of Camille and obviously the addition of Mercedes Moné, AEW has a conversation and has the argument to say that they probably have the best women's division in all professional wrestling, and especially with the addition of Camille. And Camille, I've seen a lot of her matches with NWA and NWA Power and what she's done in carrying the NWA Women's Championship on her, for all that time, and pretty much carrying that company on her back for a little bit of time too, with them going through their stuff, especially during COVID and stuff like that. So Camille is definitely a great addition. Now, I don't know how they will debut Camille. If I had to guess, it might be a Double or Nothing, as a surprise debut, if you will. The same thing with Alex Shelley and Chris Sabin. Two great, additions to the roster for AEW. So, to me, I think AEW, the biggest thing with AEW is storylines. And I think right now they have a great storyline with this Elite and Tony Khan. And I think they can, they need to continue to keep building off of this. And the other thing, too, is now that we've seen Kenny Omega come back, are we going to see Adam Page come back? Because, like I told you guys before, man, and maybe I have told you this, maybe I haven't, but I'll tell you guys now, with this storyline going on right now between the Elite and Tony Khan, and then having Kenny Omega come back last night, and the Elite and Jack Perry and Okada attacking Kenny Omega, and the FTR also getting involved and saving Omega, to me, this is lining up a match here for this summer between the Elite and Kenny Omega and FTR and a partner of their choosing for Blood and Guts. And to me, that partner for Kenny Omega and FTR would be none other than Adam Page. And I could see Adam Page possibly returning back here soon for All Elite Wrestling. So, that right there, you got the Young Bucks, Matt and Nick Jackson. You have Okada and Jack Perry. And then on the other side of the coin, you have FTR, Dax and Cash, Kenny Omega, and then Kenny Omega and FTR teaming up with Adam Page to have a 4-on-4, if you will, Blood and Guts match this summer. I'm all for it. I'm absolutely all for it. And I think that's kind of what we're going to get. Or, God forbid, if we get a Calgary, not a Calgary Stampede match, but a Stampede match in AEW. To me, I think this fits the mold more for Blood and Guts. Have, all these competitors in a cage and they fight it out, and that's it. And a lot of people even said with what's going on right now with the Elite and Tony Khan, it could just be something where, kind of like how it was for WCW, where NWO was almost a bigger thing than WCW was. Are we kind of going to, get the same thing between the Elite and Tony Khan might run Collision and Elite run Dynamite, or are we going to get a roster split? I think that might be a stretch right now. If I was fantasy booking, yeah, I would love to have the rosters be split between Collision and Dynamite, but I've been saying that for the past couple years now, but when it pertains to Dynamite and when Collision was introduced. So the roster split was definitely needed. But all in all, man, I think the storyline right now between the Elite and Tony Khan is the best thing going right now. And right now they need something like this because a lot of the main event talent right now are just injured, man. Adam Cole's out, MJF's out, Omega just came back. We haven't seen Adam Page in a while. Hopefully he comes back in a week or two. A lot of talent's out. Britt Baker's out, Jamie Hayter's out. So there's injuries that are also, kind of hurting, AEW right now. Bryan Danielson's injured as well after the match he had with Ospreay. So the main event scene's kind of murky, if you will. In a small way right now in AEW. They can't just rely constantly on Will Ospreay, even though I'm a big fan of Ospreay. But right now, Ospreay can't just carry this company on his back right now. There's no way. And That's why I think with what the Elite are doing with Tony Khan, it is the best thing right now going for AEW. And honestly, it's excitement. It's great to see what's going to happen next week between the Elite and Tony Khan, or the Elite and Kenny Omega. Are we going to see Kenny Omega come back next week, or possibly see Adam Page return next week to kind of join forces with Kenny Omega and FTR to lead up to a match possibly for this summer for Blood and Guts? I mean, it's definitely a lot of excitement right now, in my opinion, surrounding AEW, which I'm absolutely all for, man. So I'm definitely anticipating next week and what is going to happen with AEW, especially when it pertains to the Elite and Tony Khan. But with that being said, this is my review of AEW's Dynamite. I hope you guys are out there staying safe. Be careful, and remember,